You know, some bands play music, and other bands write the entire rule book. Today, we're talking about Led Zeppelin. They didn't just create songs, they created the very idea of the rock god. We're going to break down exactly how they did it, their blueprint for total rock domination. But here's the crazy part, the central mystery of it all. At the peak of their powers, the music critics, they hated them. I mean, they absolutely despised them. So how on earth does a band that gets torn apart by the press become the biggest act on the entire planet? Well, that's the question we're going to dig into. Okay, so piece number one of this blueprint, the sound. And we're not talking about just a small step forward here. This was a full-blown revolution. And it all came from the vision of one guy, Jimmy Page, rising from the ashes of his old band, the Yardbirds. Now, Jimmy Page was already a guitar legend, right? He was the last in a line of incredible guitarists for the Yardbirds. But by 1968, that band was basically done. It just fell apart. The thing is, they played their last show, but Page was stuck. He still had tour dates he was obligated to play. So what does he do? He scrambles, pulls together this monster new lineup. You got Plant, Jones, and Bonham. And just to get the job done, they head out on the road as the new Yardbirds. And this right here, this gets to the absolute core of Jimmy Page's musical DNA. He had this philosophy he called light and shade. And it was a totally radical idea for the time. Think about it, smashing together these super delicate, quiet acoustic parts with just brutal, ferocious electric power. That contrast, that dynamic shift, that became the bedrock of everything they did. Page was totally obsessed with getting that power onto a record. He'd listened to other rock bands from the 60s, and he just wasn't hearing it. He famously said the drums sounded like someone hitting cardboard boxes, just weak and tinny. He just knew he needed something that sounded huge, something that felt alive. So what was his big idea? It's genius in its simplicity. See, back then, everybody put mics right up on the drum kit. Standard procedure. Page and his engineer, Glyn Johns, they did the exact opposite. They started moving the mics away, sometimes 20 feet back. They figured out that distance equals depth. By doing that, they captured the sound of the room itself, the natural echo, the ambience. And that is how they got that thunderous, absolutely massive John Bonham drum sound, a sound that honestly changed rock drumming forever. All right, so they've got this revolutionary sound locked down. What's next? Well, let's look at the second part of the blueprint, how they handled the business side of things. Because with their manager, the, let's just say, intimidating Peter Grant, they didn't just play the game, they flipped the whole board over. Just take a look at the deal they got from Atlantic Records back in '68. For a brand new band, it was just unheard of. I mean, yeah, the huge cash advance was nice, but the real game changers are the next two things. First, Jimmy Page got total 100% artistic control. The label couldn't say a word about their music or their album covers. And second, they didn't have to release singles in the UK. Think about how crazy that is. And out on the road, oh man, Peter Grant was an absolute shark. He completely flipped the script on promoters. Before him, bands got a pretty small piece of the pie. Grant walked in and demanded, get this, up to 90% of the ticket money. 90%. Promoters were stunned. They never seen anything like it. And this move didn't just make Zeppelin ridiculously rich. It changed the entire power structure of live music, putting the artists back in control. So that no singles clause in the contract, that brings us to a huge piece of their strategy. You gotta remember, this was a time when the 45 RPM single was king. It's how most people bought music. But Grant and Zeppelin? They decided, no. For us, the album is the real work of art. And their thinking was pretty simple, really. It was like they were saying, our music isn't some disposable pop song. It's a journey. You have to listen to the whole thing. And man, was it a brilliant move. It created this amazing mystique around the band. It basically invented the whole idea of album-oriented rock, or AOR, which would just take over the radio in the 70s. If you wanted to hear Led Zeppelin, you had to go all in. You had to buy the album or see the show. Okay, so they've got the sound, they've got the business model. But that still leaves that big question we started with. What about all those critics who just couldn't stand them? Well, this is the third and maybe most important part of the blueprint. Their answer was to ignore them. They just went straight to the people, building a direct connection with this huge global fan base. And believe me, the critics were not holding back. This review from Rolling Stone for their very first album is pretty brutal. It calls Plant's singing strained and unconvincing. And get this, it basically calls them a ripoff of the Jeff Beck group. Ouch! And this wasn't a one-off thing. This is the kind of stuff they had to deal with all the time. So what's their response to all that hate? It was this. While the critics were busy calling them fakes, their 1973 tour went out and didn't just break the Beatles' attendance record at Shea Stadium, it completely shattered it. We're talking a gross of over $4 million, which back then was just an astronomical amount of money. The fans had voted with their wallets, and it was pretty clear they weren't reading the reviews.
Okay, now we can't talk about Zeppelin without talking about the controversies. It's a complicated subject. See, their music is so deeply rooted in the blues, and in the blues tradition, it's really common to borrow and reinterpret old lyrics and riffs. But when you bring that into the big money world of commercial rock, well, that's where you get accusations of plagiarism. And there were quite a few. Some of these, like with Whole Lotta Love, were settled out of court and credits were added. In other high-profile cases, like the big lawsuit over Stairway to Heaven, the courts actually ruled in their favor.
So you take the sound, the business smarts, the massive tours, and it all comes together to create their legacy. They really did become something more than just a band. They became a myth, the ultimate rock gods who went on to define an entire genre of music. Or maybe more than one.
You know, one of the biggest arguments that still goes on today is, what were they? Were they the first heavy metal band? I mean, you can make a great case for it, right? You've got the super heavy guitar riffs, Plant's high-pitched vocals, all the lyrics about mysticism and fantasy. But here's the thing. The band hated that label. They thought it was too limiting. They always saw themselves as a hard rock band, a band that was all about that light and shade, that used acoustic guitars and was built on a foundation of the blues. So what's the answer? Honestly, they were probably both.
So let's wrap this all up. What's the takeaway? Led Zeppelin built this incredible blueprint for superstardom. It was based on a sound no one had ever heard, a business plan that broke all the rules, and this powerful, direct line to their fans that made the critics totally irrelevant. And that just leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Was the Zeppelin blueprint the absolute pinnacle of rock music, the highest a band could ever fly? Or was it something else? A myth so huge, so tied to that specific moment in time that it could never, ever happen again?